kick it off. Yes, so hello everyone. Welcome to the third event in this mini series on dispersed Sri Lankan heritage, ways of accessing, seeing and working with collections. Thank you to those who have made it into the virtual room today. Thank you also to those who will be listening, watching this. Sorry? Yes. Oh, Asoka is here. That's wonderful. So we have a session today that depends more than others, perhaps, on the power of the gods, of supernatural forces or technical forces. Asoka is joining us from Sri Lanka and a few other people, but we are obviously very aware of the current situation and of how this is making it really, really difficult for people to join. One more reason for us, of course, to persevere, but also to record this and make this available to people later on. Our session today is about an hour and 15 minutes long. Janice Liashko, my co-convener, the person who really invented and thought about this series, will be introducing the speakers today. The speakers are Alicia, Schrikker and Asoka de Zoysa, and I may, if there is time, make some comments on the talks. No particular housekeeping, just keep yourselves muted, please, when possible. Thank you to Isles, of course, for making this possible. And over to you, Janice.
Thank you, Zoltán. You can hear me, right? So if you have questions and want to write them in the chat, do, and there'll be time at the end as well to ask. The questions are the important part for us here, as well as getting to see other kinds of views. And today we are really lucky to have Alicia Schrikker, who lectures at Leiden University on colonial and global history from the 18th and 19th centuries. Her work is really timely and interesting for our greater sort of emphasis now on understanding local aspects of what we think we understand about colonialism. And the questions that she's continued to ask in her research continue to evolve, thankfully, into an amazing array of participants who have been working with her with the Rijksmuseum, and we're going to hear about that today. But I want to give a sort of acknowledgement of one of her recent co-edited efforts, Being a Slave, which she edited with Nirarikaram Singhe. The multi-dimensional and multidisciplinarity, which is arising in the study of history, but especially around the Indian Ocean, is truly changing the kinds of questions we might want to ask, because we're seeing material in different ways. And that's what we're celebrating today. We are really lucky to also have Asoka de Zoysa, who's there on the screen, and I smile at you, Asoka, who, like Alicia, represents this wonderful breadth. Asoka comes from Sri Lanka, but spent a rather long time in Germany, where he collected his degrees and went back to Sri Lanka to teach. He writes an amazing array, and that's, I think, what we celebrate today, the sort of need to really work deeply and at the same time look broadly. Asoka's various publications include the evolving traditions of Buddhist image houses. And I emphasize the notion of evolving, which is a rather good theme for us to take. But he has been involved in many, many other things. And one of the most interesting things I know about Asoka is the degree of expertise and engagement that he has with the theater, with commenting on the theater, that is performing arts, as well as with music, both East and West. These kinds of sort of large frames that scholars are bringing out to looking at material culture is, I think, again, something to be celebrated as we try to grapple with rethinking legacies, what they allow us to do and not do. And finally, Zoltán, I hope, will have a few minutes at the end to offer a comment or so. And he himself, again, represents the breadth of the thinking and looking that we can celebrate. As a professor at UCL in global history, a recent talk that he gave, which I happened to be able to hear, "Is There a Global Early Modern?" was not only interesting, but its second half, "Does it matter?" I think again frames the importance of what we're doing. As Zoltán said, as John has said, because of the constraints for the audience, these talks are very informal, to present material and to bring us together to think in different kinds of ways. And we're hoping that this will simply spawn further ways to consider how we can talk collectively about the past and its importance for the future. So Alicia, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janice, for this kind introduction. I will start sharing my screen. I have a PowerPoint and loads of pictures to show you. And I'm going to share this presentation, and I'll do it together with Asoka. Asoka, now that you're here, would you like to speak yourself during the presentation, or do you want me to run your presentation as you had prepared it? Because we tested it and it works.
Yeah, I didn't expect to join in spite of power cut. It was midnight when I finished that presentation. I mean, the vocal part of it, and I don't think it was very successful. And I can very quickly skip through if you can handle the technical part, so that we are in focus on what object we are speaking about and a little depth of what happened between Amsterdam, Colombo, and London in the last 2 years.
Okay, we'll do it that way then. I will now start sharing my first part of the presentation, which I prepared myself.
Yeah. And you can hand over it. Yeah.
Share it. There we go. Okay, so thanks Janice and Fusati for organizing this meeting today. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend the previous sessions, which I would have really loved to join, but I was, well, I say unfortunate, but I was actually on a holiday. What I'm going to do today is give you a bit of an impression of the Sri Lankan objects that are presently kept in Dutch collections, in particular the Rijksmuseum and the National Museum of World Cultures, which is a conglomerate of a number of ethnographic museums. I'll show you a bit about, I'll show you some of the websites and the entries into the digitized collection database that they have, just to give you an idea of what is there. And after that, I will start to give an introduction to the joint provenance research we've done into a number of these objects, and which I've done together with Asoka, the Zoysa, and a number of other people. And so I will give a brief introduction on the range of objects that we studied and the way in which we approached it. And then after that, Asoka will take over to talk more in depth about one of these objects, which is perhaps arguably also one of the most interesting of the set. And then after Asoka has spoken, I will return with a few concluding remarks. So in the past, if you were interested in Sri Lankan objects in the Netherlands, you would turn to this classic catalogue by PhD H. Silva, which I think everybody knows. The Catalogue of Antiquities of Objects from Sri Lanka Abroad. And it's still actually a fantastic catalogue to start with if you're curious what's where. But times have changed now. And actually I bring the volume here just to show it to you, but somebody else has lent it from the library. And it's not available on Google Books, as you probably know, but it is still a very important book, I think. But these days, if you're interested or even just curious to know what's available in the Netherlands, or what Netherlands institutions keep from Sri Lanka, you can go to the museum websites. The Rijksmuseum has, and I think many of you have already visited it, but the Rijksmuseum has a very fancy website these days, with part of it is called the Rijksstudio. And that's where you can basically jump into the depot and see all the objects that they have, that they contain. So I'm going to show it to you in a minute. And perhaps less well known is the National Museum of World Cultures, that includes the former royal collection, or part of the former royal collections, and is a merging of a number of ethnographic museums. Their collections are also online, and you can find objects relating to Sri Lanka there as well. So what does it look like? The website of the Museum of World Cultures looks like this, and it's pretty user-friendly. I just, for the sake of example, I entered Sri Lanka as a search term, but there are of course other ways you can search.
Alicia, it hasn't moved for us. Have you moved?
Yes. Is it not moving?
No.
Oh dear.
Maybe just reload it, stop sharing and start it. Oh no, now it's
Okay. Oh, this happened last time as well. I don't know is the view good enough in this way?
Can you maybe briefly show the previous two?
Oh yeah, sure.
Just
sure.
quickly,
It wasn't that much.
So just people on the recording, people can stop it there. And WorldCat.
Sorry,
okay.
so I just showed the
course,
title and said that I regretted I couldn't show you the actual book, but it's so much in one. And then this is just the information about the websites and the digital collections that I'm going to show.
Thank you.
And then this is just this is the interface used by the National Museum of World Cultures. You can see here the 4 museums that it actually includes, the 4 museum collections. And just by trial, I entered Sri Lanka, and then you get over 2,000 hits. So just to give you an idea of the number of objects that this huge collection contains. And it's these are, and actually on the screen you see these are the first hits that we get. And so you see also how diverse the collection is. It contains more recent acquisitions in the museum, such as the poster that is being shown on the right. But it also shows 18th century acquisitions, such as the comb that you see here in the middle bottom, the ivory comb.
Alicia, is there any way you can make the screen larger? At the moment, I'm seeing you large and the screen small.
Okay, do you see my slide now?
I mean, you see it. It's just quite small, so it's hard to.
Oh, why is this? How does it? When I do it this way, is it still the same?
Isn't there some button?
Gosh.
Bente, if you know, can you speak to Alicia?
Yes, I can. I think. Is it okay if I do it in Dutch? And I can just.
Ja.
Ik denk als je je scherm opnieuw deelt.
Oké, stop sharing.
Dus wel de presentatie aan. En dan kun je kiezen welk scherm. En dan moet je het scherm delen wat de presentatie weergeeft, zeg maar.
Ja, dat deed ik toch?
Ja, alleen nu had je zeg maar jouw bestand open.
Ja. Oké, wacht even.
Ik denk dat het werkt, dat het... Oh nee, nu is het weer deze. Ja, maar dan moet je gewoon hierin verder klikken, zeg maar.
Ja.
Het
stom is dat hij nu helemaal...
Ja.
Werkt dit?
Als je nu op F5 of op die schermweergever klikt rechts onderin. Ja?
Ja, hij reageert daar niet meer op. Dat is echt heel irritant. Sorry guys, it's a good practice for your Dutch. Yeah. But something is stuck.
If you hit slideshow.
Werk je met 2 schermen?
Ja, ik zit naast het andere scherm.
Oh.
Hoe kan ik dat anders doen?
Zitten ze op 1 computer?
Ja, ik zit op mijn werk, weet je wel. Bij die...
Oh, ja. Ja, het is ook, nou ja.
I'm really embarrassed, guys. This is typically me, I'm afraid.
Nothing to be embarrassed of.
Heb je zeg maar op het ene scherm dat je de slide ziet en op het andere scherm met de PowerPoint, zeg maar?
Ja, ik zit nu... Ja, hij deelt het scherm, maar dat wil ik ook helemaal niet. Hoe kan ik daarvan afkomen?
Ja, maar dat is hoe wij het zien, zeg maar. Dus je kan als je screenshare aanzet, kiezen welk scherm je deelt.
Sorry, Bente is teaching me a lot here. Hoe kan ik dat dan stoppen?
Dus dat je eerst screenshare uitzet.
Ja.
En dan
hoe kan ik hem in die
try it again. En dan als je nu op share screen klikt, kan je dan kiezen rechts van welk scherm je deelt. Welk venster, zeg maar.
I could see it fine. I don't know.
It just wasn't on slideshow.
Yeah.
Well,
let's just maybe keep it like this. I think that's easiest for now, right?
She can't hit slideshow to.
No,
I don't think so. Yeah, but John, what is it? The problem you can't see when you are in.
Let's just go ahead.
Alicia, so that's fine for us. Yeah.
Can other people
I'm
see the
eating
screen?
up. Yeah, this is eating up a lot of time.
Yeah. No, it's fine. I can see the screen. It's rather small, but
you can still see it, so that's fine.
Okay, I wish it was otherwise, but technology is not my forte.
It's okay.
Even after these 2 years. Yeah. Okay, so I was just showing you how I wanted to give you an idea of the database, the digital database of the Ethnology Museum. And similarly, and I think this is what more of you are familiar with, this is the Rijksstudio from the Rijksmuseum, where you can also enter all sorts of keywords, such as Sri Lanka. And then this is what you see. And I hope all of you that you will see what I see on my screen as well, which are, in this case, photos, 19th century photos. But if you enter Ceylon, you get drawings by accident. These are all 18th century drawings. I think many of these are familiar to you, the Brandes collection. But there are also other items that appear from the Rijksstudio here. Just as an example, an ivory image of a moedeliaar, a Candian ring and an ivory box, which all arrived in the collection at different moments. They're all 17th, 18th century, but they have very different provenance histories. Of the ring, we know that it arrived in the collection of the Dutch royal family in the 18th century, but we don't know exactly under what circumstances. So there's still a lot to research. But most objects from the 18th century are weapons. And this has to do with the history of collecting and the nature of collecting of the Royal House of Orange. And they were particularly interested in weapons. And these are the objects that we have been researching together with Asoka de Zoysa and Ganga Dispersed and a number of other persons. And that's because these objects were considered controversial. They are said to have been part of the loot of the Dutch-Candian Wars in the middle of the 18th century. And that they have arrived in the collection of the Dutch royal family as war trophies. And this was said, but there were also other histories or other stories about these objects. And I guess the starting point for the research was the discussion about restitution, which I think is a global discussion at the moment. But in the end, our research went beyond the question of this, was it loot or not? And we ended up writing more like biographies of the objects as a whole. And that was part, and just showing you the next slide, I hope you will see it. It was part of a larger project. It's called Proce, which was funded by the Dutch government, but executed by a number of institutes, including the Dutch Institute of War Documentation. And I was asked to coordinate the work package on Sri Lanka, which I did with a core research group, of which Asoka was part and Ganga Disnayake, but also Senarat Wickramasinghe on behalf of the National Museum and Shamikara Pilapitia, and also Doreen van den Boogaard, another Dutch historian who worked with me in the archives. I think it was, well, I think there are two things I will say, and then I'll move quickly so that Asoka can speak. But it was a highly collaborative project, and it was a wonderful experience from my point of view, because I learned an extremely great deal from it. It was collaboration, it involved collaboration across institutes, across borders, across disciplines, and we worked with canon experts from the UK, with chemical experts from the Rijksmuseum. It enriched my own research in many ways. And we also, around this core group, we had a larger group of historians and experts who would also give us feedback. So I'll just bring into light the 6 objects that we focused on. Asoka will speak about the canon, which is highly decorated. I think one of the points, or one of the things that I learned from this research, is that we may look at an object and think we know the object. So I look at the cannon and I might think it's a cannon, or I look at the pihia, a knife, and I think it's a knife, but when we look up more closely, we see all sorts of other details. And I'll just show you the castane, the golden castane here. It's once you start looking more closely at the material that you learn so much more, not just about it as a weapon, but you can relate it to art history, to the actual political history that evolved around these objects. And so that's one of the things that we learned, and we managed to really locate the objects in the VOC archives and Royal Archives as well, and it was quite exciting. It was intensive work. Here we have a picture, we're looking at the Maratuwaku, the large guns in the studio of the Rijksmuseum, where we were weighing it and checking the material composition. So it was highly interdisciplinary. I think Asoka, we will move now to the canon. Are you there?
PowerPoint
yes.
from yesterday.
Yes.
You can hear me, no?
Yeah, so I will now open the other PowerPoint.
Yeah. Good evening to everybody all over good friends and new friends. Yeah, thanks for also including myself. Ganga cannot be part of this. We also had some technical problems. As you see, we have a power cut and there is very little scope to be working professionally at the moment in Colombo. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, fine, thank you. Yeah, when just after the Easter attack, I think about 3 years ago in Colombo, or in Sri Lanka, Martin Gonzalez arrived in Colombo with this proposition about a candy cannon. I didn't know what it was at that time. I didn't know anything about cannons, and I was very skeptic at the first meeting. I almost left the meeting because I didn't like the atmosphere. But over the years, or over the first few months, we got more close. Martin shared with us the entire collection on data stick and gave it us. And that was the first sign of collaboration, which I'm very grateful. I had been working in the Berlin Museum of Indian Art. So when I was studying there, and also been participating in organizing museums and exhibitions and lectures. So I had some kind of background, but this brought me to a different area. And then when we came to Leiden on a visit to see to participate in a conference, we met Jan de Hond at the Rijksmuseum, who was extremely nice. That was the second big turn out that we could see the canon, not touch it, but see the other objects also in context. And in the meantime, we knew Alicia and Doreen in Colombo and also in Leiden. So this has been a kind of a collaboration which took some time to get going. And I think that was the most important thing. And another very important thing that Ganga and I are independent researchers under a university research institute. We are working under the Vice Chancellor of the Kelaniya University. So we have a lot of leverage to work, to explore, and to also allocate our time. The third thing is that after the trust was built, the pandemic came and we thought everything was going to stop. But we had time. I retired suddenly and we had a lot of time in our hands. Janice was also wondering what's happening now. Why is Asoka working so much? You had time. It was a luxury to work and to be talking to Alicia and to Doreen and the other. And we had so many Skype meetings. This wouldn't have been possible under normal circumstances. We were exchanging and both of you had been sending us a lot of PDFs of documents. We couldn't leave the house. I couldn't go to the Colombo National Museum even for just to look at. So this time was a luxury to work and to write this rather comprehensive report. I don't know whether it's always possible to do such kind of research, but that was a luxury. Now let's, the time gave us and our working conditions at the University of Kelaniya. Can we move to the canon now, please? This is a very highly ornate canon. I have looked at other canons that have been, this is a miniature canon, have been kept in different museums. This has some special features. First thing, next slide, please. It has an inscription in Sinhalese, which dates it to the mid-18th century, something like 1745. And it was deciphered and next slide, in a very archaic Sinhalese, but we were not sure. This is 1894, but my colleague Ganga went into a lot of trouble, next slide please, to look at contemporary or a little later inscriptions on metal and on painted on the walls to identify whether the style of writing was similar. Next slide, please. And she was successful in doing this kind of rather minute work to place it in a certain time. And the grammar was also a problem, which is also very archaic. We are in a very early time of Lankan art history or history, 1745. This is the start of the Nayaka period, very, very early. This is before Kirti Rajasinghe, whom everybody knows. Then we had another problem in dating the year that was given. Next slide, please. Ganga also discovered this Narada Sanghita, which is an astrological almanac. Next slide, please. And had some astrologers helping her. Here's the next slide. And did a very complicated mathematical calculation and came at a closer date. So three things. We identified the calligraphy or the writing style, the grammar, and the date. Next came the problem, next slide, please, that there is this sun and moon, two moons emblem on the canon. Now there was a date given, a person's name was mentioned as Mr. Leuke, and this emblem. Then I did the research on this emblem, looked at the Hatarakorale flag, because we know this. Next slide, please. And this was amazing to find on the corner of the Sri Lankan flag, the VOC lion standing around. Now this, we just keep it quiet at the moment. Why the VOC? Why this Hatarakorale? Next slide, please. Or we can skip the next slide and go to the next one. Yeah, next one, please. The lion is always there. This is the emblem that gave us the next clue. The moon, half crescent moon, the sun, and the lion, pedong, you call it, the soul. Hatarakorale, we have shown on the map, is the gate to Kandy. This was guarded by this family of Leuke, who were very responsible for the king's security. And he was an ambassador who knew many languages. So we also found that he had connections with the Arakan state, which nobody talks about. This is something very, very exciting. This is a state on the western coast of Burma. And we had diplomatic missions going out there much earlier. We always talk about the Siamese delegations, but this was something, and we discovered in the course of our research. And yeah, next slide, please. We can skip the next 2 slides, Alicia. These are some Dutch maps. We consulted Dutch maps, and then dissected this cannon in certain parts and discovered different embellishments. We can go very quickly now, Alicia, because I don't want to make it too boring. Some of these elements seem very rudimental, but we discovered them on Kandyan murals of later times. Next slide. This is called the Annasi Mala. This is Ganga's research again. Very minute details of this pineapple flower. Yeah, next slide. You can just go on now, Alicia, because, and we found also that this cannon may have had 2 lives. One is the founding of the cannon, maybe in Europe. And in the course of our research, 2 other cannons appeared in the Windsor collection, which looked very similar. These are very frightening because they seem to belong to the same foundry. That was some research that was done by Ari Papo in Netherlands. So we were grappling with the Windsor cannons and the Sri Lankan cannon. And next slide, please. What is there from the international cannon manufacturing are these 2 dolphins.
Have we lost Asoka there? Maybe he's coming back.
Yeah.
He coming back?
Hold on, Asoka, we can't hear you for now. I'm sorry, we still can't hear you, Asoka. Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, now, yes. I think now you're back. Yes.
Yeah, we are unstable here. I'll go very quickly because I don't know what will happen to the current situation, the electricity. Yeah, can you skip this next few slides, please?
So you were just mentioning the dolphins.
Yeah, the dolphins, and then yeah, and this tree in the middle is the wish-conferring Kalpavruksha, and then there were some animals that we were discussing. Next slide, please. And some of these animals didn't look very Sri Lankan or Asian, some of these birds. So we were grappling about the provenance again. Where was it embellished? And we finally came to the conclusion it was founded in the Netherlands and embellished in Kandy with Sri Lankan designs like this. Next, please. Next one. Yeah, so I'm just comparing some of them. There was a silver section which looked like Kandyan, and the darker section was maybe from the Netherlands, the basic cannon. Next slide, please. Yeah, next one. Yeah, we can move on. Yeah, this tree was interesting. No, that tree, please. Yeah. Yeah, this tree was interesting, where there were peacocks and squirrels walking around. And we have, from a later times, a similar idea in the Riddhi Vihara in Kurunagal. I think we are now done with the entire presentation. Can we just go down? Yeah, to that face. Yeah, the goatee. That face. No. Okay. Yeah. Can we have then the blue one? Yeah, that face. Yeah. Yeah, this face was enigmatic. It looked like a cherub with wings, but there was a goatee, you know, this beard-like thing. And this same face appeared in one of the Windsor cannons. So it was very obvious somebody was experimenting or trying to make some kind of exotic decoration in outside Sri Lanka. And the goatee comes from the satyr, you know, the kind of goat-legged mythical being. That was a composite idea that had come into the canon. We can continue now. Alicia, go to the blue-colored, that general scene where we have the gun carriage. Yeah, the gun carriage, yes. Yeah, now this gun carriage was my section, and I looked at these animals on the carriage, painted. Some of these emblems looked very, very, you know, French, like the bubonic sun. And these animals looked more Western. Now we came to the chinoiserie now suddenly, because the chinoiserie is something that happened in France. They were copying Chinese and Eastern motifs onto their furniture and other objects. So we have there a borrowing from the East here on the gun carriage. So we have a very complex art history here. The object history is also interesting. The cannon may have been brought to Sri Lanka with the other cannons, and one was embellished, and this Leuke, who was an important minister, gifts this most likely to the king. Why he was gifting a cannon, which was very valuable and a very dangerous weapon, was the next question. But then we discovered that cannons have been donated both ways, gifted. The Thai king also gifts a cannon to the Sun King, Louis XIV. And there were these cannon diplomacies that we stumbled on. That is the word that came from the British Museum, from the Windsor Castle coined. Cannon diplomacy. Today we are at war because diplomacy has failed. So we are in a new area of discovering a cannon that is very dangerous, is being gifted along with weapons as peacemaking. That was our final finding. And it involved a lot of time and effort. And we are publishing also, thanks to the Rijksmuseum. There are 2 bulletin articles coming out. So that's my contribution. Can we have the last slide, please? That written one. Yeah, I am not a big fan of transporting objects from one museum to the other. I have seen the Prajna Paramita in the Indonesian Museum in Jakarta, and it's a sad state. We have discussed this with Janice also about the Tara. Tara coming to Colombo is not going to solve the colonial baggage. But Tara can be in the British Museum, and we can research where does she belong, who worshipped her, things like that. And I think trust building is a very important thing if we are talking about this kind of collaboration, trust building between institutions, also locally. Because we find that our local museum and archives keep data away from us. It's very difficult to get access to data, I mean to objects, to take photographs, and everybody is a gatekeeper. Even a small person in the museum will not allow us to take a photograph, and we have to virtually worship to get these. The Colombo archive, which has a Dutch large collection, is closed to us. So these are the problems that we have because of no trust in Sri Lanka. But thank God the trust was established with our foreign colleagues, and we were able to do a multidisciplinary approach. That's my third line. Art history, object history, cannon diplomacy, and such things. Artillery history was handled in London, in the UK. Founding of cannons was done again in Amsterdam. Dynasty histories of Kandy was done by Ganga, and myself, Siam and the Arakan state, epigraphy and astrology. So we are covering a wide range of different disciplines. We are not masters in any of these disciplines. I'm an art historian. Ganga is more of an ethnographer now. So it was a challenge to look at a canon which we didn't even know existed 3 years ago. And sharing information with absolute trust was the most important thing. And be able to communicate with Zoom. This was also a blessing from the pandemic, that we were able to talk as if Alicia is in this room. And the respect that we gave to each other on this collaboration. Everybody was respecting each other for their views. We don't know the final result of this rather tedious work. And we hope to also continue. We were on a mission to look at the ivory collections in Western Europe. We were in Vienna before that. And also Rijksmuseum we didn't see, but we went to the Musée Guimet in Paris, and Ganga had seen the British collection. So something that we might be also doing in future, because the ivories show us an art history that we have lost. Which is at the end of this ivory history comes the canon, the 17th century, Cote period. I think Zoltán has worked on this. We have a lot of information on it. But to reach out to the history, now there was a little statuette that was shown today, that Mudlia. I was wishing that would come to Sri Lanka because his name is known. I told Martin, why are you giving us gifts? We are having attack on a church, and you're giving us gifts of weapons. Why don't you give us something more peace? Not good. Yeah. Hello?
Yes, you've sort of broken up, but I think we got the message there.
Yeah.
Yeah. About ivories, the last word is that ivory was nothing very good in Sri Lanka before the Portuguese came, I think, because nobody likes to think about that. Ivory as material culture coming to Sri Lanka is something foreign, and they never made Buddha statues out of ivory earlier. I'm moving out of this framework. And yeah, that's the statuette I was talking about. There is a name, Alicia, given. So we can move on to further research. We are doing this also with our own resources and with our own free time. It's enjoyable. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Asoka. Alicia, do you want to add something to that?
I do, but I'm struggling with my computer. Yes, thank you, Asoka, for presenting our research so well. And I think what Asoka has emphasized, the joy of collaboration, was entirely from our side, confirmed from our side as well. And I learned a great deal. Now, perhaps I think we should move on to the discussion, but I had a few remaining slides to show you. First of all, I put these in the chat. These are the links to the reports as well, in case you want more information. But I thought, and this also relates to what Asoka was saying at the end, the discussion about restitution is, well, it's currently high on the agenda in the Netherlands and globally, I think. But meanwhile, our museums have also started a new project, and this is led by, again, by the Rijksmuseum and Museum of World Culture, that wants to rethink, you know, how to deal, what are we to do as community with these objects in a sustainable way? How can we show them, share them in such a way that it becomes productive again? So I just wanted to guide you to their website. They've just started, and there will be a lot of activities from that field as well. I'll put the links in the chat. But I'll leave it for there because we have already taken more time than we were supposed to.
Thank you, Alicia. I suppose we can sort of go over time a little bit, but I'll still keep my comments very, very short. I just wanted to say a few things in response to this great presentation and to the heroic labor that you've done over the years, but also today. And also just say, really, it's just less than 5 minutes, something about the series as a whole. Now that we're in the third session. So I mean, much material for the study of Sri Lanka's past is dispersed around the world. And as historians, we can really ask sort of two main questions around this. One of this is, why is it so dispersed? And the other one is, what can we do about it? Why is it so dispersed is obviously a fascinating question, and which cannot be untangled from Sri Lanka's multi-layered colonial past. Right? 3 European powers have interacted and intervened in the island. Material flows were at the heart of early modern globalization, we know that. So it's not surprising that so much Sri Lankan material culture is abroad. There can be no doubt that many of these transactions were commercial, so in a sense totally legitimate. Many of them were also diplomatic, as Asoka was saying just now. The question then becomes, of course, is that commercial interaction, the diplomatic interaction, always fair? So even where we feel, the transaction was legitimate, there can, of course, be complicating factors around it. And then, of course, there is straightforward loot, the stealing of objects, the decontextualization by force of objects, and the displacement by force, which obviously also happened. And we will be talking about those things over the years to come. The second question is, what can we do about it? And here, the English expression as such is both irritatingly unpolitical. What can we do about it? That's very, very English in the way it's detached from the sort of big moral issues surrounding it, but also quite useful in a way for our purposes. So Janice and I thought quite long about how to frame these 3 sessions. And we felt that before we ask the really polemic questions about which some decisions are forthcoming, for example, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, etc., we should try to focus on some practicalities first. And why? In part because we feel that there is really a lot of value in starting to talk about the practicalities in itself. So to do something about it is actually to understand, why are these things dispersed, and how can we research them, and what can they do for our understanding of the past, the understandings of different communities, both, of course, the former colonial powers, but also the former colonized. And I think that there's really, right now, I mean, we can see the cup half full, half empty. Half empty in the sense that obviously there is still an imbalance in that it's easier to research objects when you are in the Netherlands, in the UK, etc. Until not very long ago, it was really, really difficult to access these objects. It could also be very expensive. And of course, we know museums were not doing it just to make our lives miserable, but until just 5 years ago, to get pictures of ivory caskets from the V&A was a torture, and it was extremely expensive. And even when you acquired pictures, you weren't allowed to use them in the way you wanted, etc., etc. Now, that really is changing. And I think in that sense, even before any big political decisions are made, the museums have moved in a direction that is incredibly helpful for us. So what Asoka and Alicia, the photos that we were showing today, photos of this quality are now available, for example, on the V&A website, free of charge to anyone. You can Google, for example, Robinson casket, and you can be upset about, why is this called the Robinson casket? Shouldn't it just be called, casket from Sri Lanka, 16th century? But nevertheless, the images are there, and the power that these images give to anyone sitting anywhere with a good internet connection, that's of course another problem, but it's also an opportunity. It allows you to zoom in. And so instead of, standing, it's of course wonderful to stand in a darkened room with that casket in the room, and to have the presence of the aura of the original. But on the other hand, it's a tiny object. It's actually quite hard to see and to understand what's on it when you are in its presence. And these pictures, you know, they reveal a totally different dimension. And I think with the canon, it's the same, right? Who has ever looked at these things in so much detail? Who has ever been able to spend time, you know, you may be allowed into the presence of the object for maybe half an hour, but with these pictures, you can really zoom in and out, and you have the power, and suddenly things hit you, right? And things that were just an ornament that no one had the time to look into, suddenly become, you know, a wish-granting tree, or an auspicious animal, or something that can be related to the European canon, to chinoiseries, but which also carries meaning in the Sri Lankan cultural context. And it takes time to work out these things, and to have an image accessible, readily available, that you can zoom in and out of, is something that grants you a lot of time, which is actually something we sometimes forget, because a lot of the debate is about space, about geography. Where are these objects, right? In a way, they, you know, now I'm not suggesting, I don't think anyone would suggest that, you know, just by handing out photographs of things, the big questions will go away of restitution, etc., etc. But I think as researchers, we certainly, you know, there's an opportunity here to grab that is fantastic, and it's the first time in history that this is happening, right? Where we can actually work with pictures and have these meetings across long distances. We don't have to meet once every 3 years. We can have Zoom meetings and discuss what might this detail mean, etc., etc. So overall, I think I'm really optimistic. Again, I don't want to depoliticize this. I don't think Janice wants to depoliticize it, but we feel that this is a wonderful example, together with the previous 2 sessions, of things that anyone can really engage with and do now, who has a good connection to the internet, which is, again, not granted. It's a privilege, but it's more widely accessible than long distance travel. So, so that's it from me, really. I think the main objective is to have this open to the floor. We can now take questions. There is one from John Guy, and then I think I'll hand over to Liosh, to Janice, sorry, to Janice to moderate the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoltán, and thank you, Alicia and Asoka, for that very stimulating presentation. I just want to make a few general comments about the whole sort of culture of restitution in the Netherlands and provenance research. Of course, it is not new. The issue came up in the 1970s and resulted in the Singasari Prajaparamita being returned to Jakarta, where it's now on display in the National Museum, has been for the last nearly 50 years. So this issue has a long history in the Netherlands, and Netherlands has certainly led Europe in dealing with post-colonial angst, shall we say, the legacy of all of that, and rightly so, and I've always been a great fan of that initiative. I think Zoltán also alluded in his comments that much of these discussions need to be far more nuanced than the simple "this is loot" characterization. Problematic, many of the objects are far less than problematic, in fact. Some certainly are. Some do constitute loot, punitive military campaigns, the results of conflict, where the victor walks away with spoils. Undoubtedly true. But much of it relates to other narratives. Again, it relates to free and open exchange. European interventions were driven by commercial motives, and much of the initial engagement on the Sri Lankan side equally by the possibility of commercial gain. So one needs to keep those elements in the foreground, I think. We speak about things. We showed the small knives, sheath knives, which are principally used for the trimming of the Ola leaf for the palm leaf manuscript. They're part of the accoutrements for Buddhist manuscripts being prepared. This is not a weapon. We look at all the array of dress swords that appear in Western collections, and the earliest one I know of appears in a British painting from the later 17th century. And is worn as a dress sword. And we certainly know from later accounts that these were routinely gifted as diplomatic gifts for people of rank. So some, and were almost never used in combat. I mean, these were dress swords, ceremonial items, which of course relates to the canon as well. We'll come to it in a moment. And when I'm reminded of things like when you examine these ceremonial swords, many that I've looked at are recycled VOC blades. So we know that the Dutch were trading in obsolescent weapons. They were selling old stock of swords that no longer had currency in European fighting fields and selling them in South Asia. And where they were happily bought because of the quality of the steel and repurposed and reset in indigenous hilts and scabbards. And many of the Sri Lankan ceremonial swords carry very clear chop marks that indicate they were initially manufactured for VOC use. So again, it's a more complex narrative that's going on here. I could go on, but I just wanted to touch on those. And then there's the whole issue of ivory that was raised at the end, which I have a special interest in. Maybe we need another session just on that. But ivory, I may have misheard Ashok, but I got the impression he was saying that the importance of ivory in Sri Lanka coincides with the European interventions. And in terms of the art historical record, that's true. But of course, the importance of ivory in South Asia is well documented right back to the early centuries of the Common Era. And in terms of Indo-Roman trade, and undoubtedly Sri Lanka was part of that wider Western Indian Ocean exchange system. So just to throwing in a few sort of thoughts and comments here, let's make the conversation a little more nuanced than perhaps it's been at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm about to tell you what time it is. The chime's going to go off. No, it's my clock. I appreciate the complication, and I want to just interject my own here with the fact that we also have to talk about the Arab traders that were obviously involved in much of this movement. So again, it's a way to recognize how many more things can be brought into thinking about the lives of people that Alicia has so wonderfully targeted, both in terms of state and local. We have another question. Dennis, would you like to ask?
I'm sorry, my camera is, okay. Actually, I would like to share some information and also pose another question. So this is a book, maybe Sri Lankans, they know about it. This is called The Catalogue of Antiquities and Other Cultural Objects from Sri Lanka Abroad. This is a catalogue created by the former Colombo National Museum director. His name is Dr. P.H.D.H. De Silva. I met him in 2019 when he was 92 years old. So what we are trying to do with collecting all these database, where the objects are, but he already did it in 1970s. And this was published in 1975. And the subject of restitution in 1981, when UNESCO announced all the countries who are interested to have their cultural objects back could apply. Sri Lanka is the first country. Dr. P.H. De Silva, with this catalogue, he sent to Netherlands, France, Switzerland, and England to asking to restitute all these cultural and art and antiquities that was removed during the colonial era, along with this catalogue. So in this catalogue, actually, he told me and he showed me there are some ivories in Munich, but it's a museum I cannot pronounce. It's called Schatzkammer der Residenz. It's a private museum. So these ivories, even he hasn't seen. So I managed to get some photographs because they said they are very open. They send me color photographs. But these ivories, Dr. Silva explained me, they are under private collectors. Same Munich and same in Zurich. These ivories are removed during the colonial era, but we cannot claim that we cannot ask them back because it's under private people. So how museums are exhibiting private collectors' items that was removed during the colonial era, and what is the responsibility as a museum? How they are exhibiting these privately owned pieces. And as a country, even if we want to study or even we want to ask for restitution, we are unable because it's under private collector. So I don't know, as a museum, Alicia, if you have any thoughts about this?
Can you unmute yourself, Alicia?
Yeah. So shall I respond to both the question?
If you like, yes.
Yes. So John, yes, you're absolutely right. I wasn't, I didn't have the time to go into great detail about everything that we have covered with the research, but of course we looked at the blades. Unfortunately, the blade of the golden castana is indeed a VOC blade. Unfortunately, the dates are unreadable. We can see that there have been letters and ciphers engraved, but we can't read them. Interestingly, and that's the silver castana has a Candian blade, so it's different. It's also a different type of steel. And that they are ceremonial items was, of course, very, very clear to us. What I meant to say is, when you first encounter them, what you see are weapons. But then when you start, first you read about them, and then once you start looking at them more closely, you see all sorts of other details that become relevant. As you are saying, and as Janice was also saying, that actually become relevant to our idea of history and historiography, because they embody these global moments in Sri Lankan history, even if it is within a world where relations were unequal at the same time. But these blades were moved to Kandy or acquired by Kandy to be used to create this gorgeous, because really, if you look at the golden castana in detail, first I thought, oh, it's just all bling bling. But when you look at it in detail, it's gorgeous. And so they produced this object, and it contains, it contains steel from the VOC. It contains rubies from Myanmar, for example, just to give another example. So that's actually what we ended up doing. So our initial question that we had to ask, because of the project, was, what is its provenance? When did it become a part of a Dutch collection? What was the exact historical circumstance? But we ended up really looking into the biography of the object as a whole. And also we ended up disentangle the objects, because I think what I hope you understood from Asoka's presentation is also that the canon is an extremely layered object. So it was founded around 1670 in the Dutch Republic, and already with certain decorations. At that point, it was gifted probably to Kandy, and then later re-gifted with all the new decorations by Leuke de Sava to King Sri Vijaya Ratesinghe, and then it was looted by the Dutch during wartime. So there is a very violent history involved there. So it's all those layers that we try to disentangle, but also bring together in our analysis. And there is a long afterlife as well once it arrives in the Netherlands. And then that afterlife also includes very early restitution requests. So we found, in relation to the canon, we found restitution requests were already made in 1965. So already 15 years before the later official UNESCO request was made. And we also, we were quite shocked to read the responses from our Ministry of Culture at the time, which were, they were very badly informed, actually, and they did not make any effort to inform themselves. Now, more in general, the catalog that you were showing, then it is, I think it's a Bible.
Yes,
right?
it's the Bible.
Yes.
It's one of the last copies,
Yes.
original copies. I
Yes.
am
So
guarding.
I don't have an original, but luckily my library has. So that's also what I also said at the start of the talk, that anybody interested or in objects in Europe or elsewhere will start with the catalog. But now with all these digitization projects, and you're right, in the larger museums, objects become accessible in a different way. But certainly, you're right, not in the smaller museums or let alone private collections. Now, I don't work at the museum, so I work at Leiden University. Okay. So I'm not sure if I have a solution to the question that you raised, but I very much see the problem, and I think it is what I can speak not for Germany. What I see happening in the Netherlands is that there is a lot of awareness creation about these colonial collections or objects that were collected in whatever way in the colonial period. Of course, the focus is more on Indonesia than on Sri Lankan objects. That's my battle also, to make sure that people are aware.
They will open a little bit. I've been battling also with Linden Museum, and I've been complaining to Professor Jan about it. I all the time is Indonesia open. Sri Lanka was also a huge.
Yeah, and you'll be amazed and you can find it in the Silva's catalog, even in small museums and small collections in different provinces. You will find original Ola manuscripts from the 18th century, or little ivory combs or other objects. So there is still a lot of work there, I think. But what I was trying to say is, I like to think that the awareness that is now created within our society is also reaching those families which with their private collections, and some of them seem to be more open also to dealing differently with their collection. But that's all I can say about it.
Also, the colonial photograph kept in Linden Museum. There are some photographs available online. Some they are not putting it because it's too sensitive. But what I heard last year, all these sensitive photographs, they are including in an exhibition in 2022. So for me, I don't understand. If it's sensitive, they are not shared on the online platform, but they are exhibiting in the museum. So it's also a question about not sharing, but also exhibiting without asking the country of origin.
And I want to interject here with Zoltán's comment that there is no single simple answer to this, except moving forward with getting as many voices out to talk about the variety of problems. So want to make sure we've got any other questions also addressed as our time goes down. But this is the critical central one that motivates trying to build more knowledge and awareness and to study these works as Asoka and Alicia have done, to bring the interest and awareness into different places so that the concerns that are very legitimate have some ballast. But let me ask if there are other questions here amongst anyone for our presentation.
Tyler has one in the chat that could be asked.
Yeah, and let me perhaps ask it in a slightly more focused way with, with what time remains. Lauka Ralahami is somebody that I've been tracking, and I've been translating and working with much of his correspondence with the VOC. And he's somebody who exists for me in an archival and textual sense. And it's very exciting to encounter an object that would have belonged to him. And I wonder what we learn about the man that we might not get, or we might not learn from just reading his words alone. What have you discovered about his connection with the VOC? Or you mentioned his involvement in the mission to secure Buddhist bhikkhus, Buddhist monks from Burma. And given that your work here is such an rich methodologically, drawing on so many different methodologies, astrology, right, Buddhist studies, art history, I wonder what this object, what we learn about the man in essence.
That question for me?
Yes, for Asoka.
Yeah, this Leuke is not Ralahama, he's Leuke Disawa. He was like a regional governor. There were three really, and Ganga traced that this was the grandfather, not the one who is usually in the eulogy of being left alone in the field, and there's a poem on him. That is the grandson. This grandfather was apparently a kind of an ambassador who knew 4 languages, and he was very influential because of this language competency. Also, he could communicate with different ambassadors, also with this Arakan state. Next thing is that, I mean, there is going to be a lot of things written on him in our reports. I don't want to now take Ganga's information. It is a wealth of information that suddenly came from oral sources. Because from the other side, we visited a temple in Ganga's research, Tempita Vihara, in a very, very forlorn, a very, very distant place. It was rather gloomy. It was very snake infested. Ganga said, don't go close. And there were 2 lions carved out of wood there, which was stolen about a week after that. So there were things that happened that Leuke family is still there. It's rather a morbid story, what's happening now to that family. So there is a family history. We don't want to tread on other people's bad family histories. There is a kind of a funny story there in the present generation. I don't want to really go into depth here, but this grandfather Leuke, or the great-grandfather Leuke, was a very shining figure who was influential. And we also have to see of this Hatarakorale area, which has a Devale, which is the Dadimunda Devale, which is like the protecting Devale of the door to Kandy. If Hatarakorale falls, Kandy falls. This Balanak fort, which everybody talks about, which gives a very lovely view of the area, is also located there. So we were researching on this area. And I think when the research is finally published, Tyler, then conversations can go on. A lot of oral history. We don't want to really unearth bad stories. About the ivory casket in the museum, in the Berlin, German museums, they are not in private collections. One is in Berlin, in the museum I was working, and one is, it's a state museum. And they are all not private collections. But at the moment, a lot of things are surfacing on sales catalogs, which is rather frightening, which I use for my own research, which is there. The photograph is there, digital photograph, but a lot of things are surfacing on sales catalogs. Postcards are another thing. They are very sensitive because women are being shown, they have been stripped naked and been shown in these photographs, those pictures that we just heard about. So there is sensitivity there, and also gatekeeping from the museum. I was very happy to hear that Zoltán also had the problems we are faced with our own museums of getting photographs. Our museums don't give us permission to take photographs, or you have to really plead. But at the moment, there is an opening out of foreign museums, and the sales catalogs also give us some leeway. So we can work on this. At the start, that was the ivory collection that we were doing, is a digitized collection. We were making a catalog, we have finalized it. And then we start the research. It is like a survey. So museums are opening out at the moment. And private collectors also will open out. I'm not saying that this is the great project that Alicia and we did together, but things are happening now. And I think we are moving on to a new generation, which are not so gatekeeperish and not so colonial that they become gatekeepers of their own objects. We have no access to our own archive in Colombo. The Dutch archive is closed. And whoever who opened it is told that she's a traitor. This is our own problem in Sri Lanka? How can we deal with other things? So we had to be very careful, trust building, be patient, and work. Thanks for listening to me.
Other questions? We have almost no time. Is there?
Can I just say, I thought it was really interesting how different the two questions were from Deneth and from John, and how it is, you know, it's a thin line that, you know, you either do too much of one thing or too little of it, and you mentioned loot, but then you don't mention it enough. There are many sensitive, well, it's a minefield really. But I think the one sort of consensus that we have here today is that if there's a, you know, pragmatically, if we can work with, if the gatekeeping is sort of kept to a minimum, and we can actually access these materials, whilst the big questions don't go away, we can actually find out a lot about these materials that may, in the longer term, perhaps influence those bigger questions in its own way, right? So I think there's always going to be a multiplicity of voices and of opinions and of you know, people feeling one way or the other about things, and that's probably never going to change. But and you know, it's always a risky move as a historian to say, oh, let's just look at each thing in its own right and without the bigger questions. Of course, that's problematic too. But at this stage, there are such opportunities out there, I think, and in this moment, that we really need to hold on to those at least, right? And I think Asoka and Alicia and this project is a wonderful example of that. The restitution questions are not resolved, but they have put a lot of hard work into just finding out more about these objects, and they become really complex and layered, and I think that's fantastic. The other thing that, you know, maybe sort of for the public record here, I mean, clearly it is desirable to have a systematic catalog of this kind of stuff. It will never be possible to have everything in one catalog, right? But the Silva catalog is a fantastic base to start from. And then the expertise of people like Asoka, you have been following maybe sales events and catalogs and pictures that show up on the internet and might be taken down again and things like that. Someone needs to keep track of these, and IELTS in a way would be, I think, in a good position to sort of centralize some of this information, some of this data in the longer term. It's always going to be something collaborative between institutions, also between individuals, and it's never going to be possible without trust. I really thank Asoka for bringing that up repeatedly, the importance of trust between institutions, but also trust between people, between individuals. Right? Sometimes you come into a meeting and you feel this is not right, but then you try to work from there. So I think all these things together, to me, make it feel like the cup is half full. That there is actually potential now to change the game, even while some questions remain unresolved. That's I think what I wanted to say. There's actually a little comment in the chat.
James Nye made an interesting point in the chat, and that is the way in which we can continue to link all of these various things that are being done in terms of documentation. We had today, and I thank you both, Asoka and Alicia, to demonstrate that when we look really closely, there is so much to learn. It starts to change the questions about what we think we're talking about when we say colonialism, and recover people who we didn't think we might ever be able to consider. And it's one of Alicia's points in her writing that I truly admire. And Zoltán, I think you're absolutely wonderful to end our session for us with, there aren't answers. We're actually not even the people immediately able to make decisions, but we need to be able to furnish them with more things to think about for the future. And it is with this material. So I think we have to let people go. It's past our time. We'd love to hear if there are more sessions like this. I happen to know that John Guy has some really interesting material and thoughts about ivory, which we've barely skimmed today, but it's an important. And I thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.